This video looks at the music of groups such as the Grateful Dead, Jefferson Airplane, and Jimi Hendrix in the context of the psychedelic and countercultural movements of the late 1960s. We'll see that individuals tended to take one of two psychedelic approaches to music. For some musicians and audiences, music was seen as enhancing the high that one might be experiencing due to the taking of drugs. For others, music itself served as the trip. Why take LSD if you could get the same experience and even remember it by absorbing oneself in music? One way individuals found to make music the trip without mind-altering drugs was through exploring Eastern philosophy and Eastern styles of music, whose hypnotic rhythms evoke trance-like states in its listeners. Members of both the Beatles and the Beach Boys journeyed to India, where they studied yoga and Indian music. You can see George Harrison playing sitar to the left of your screen. Unfortunately, members of both bands were experimenting with substances that would endanger their lives. Still, their explorations of world musics in their late albums remain groundbreaking. Rock and pop musicians were experimenting with everything from marijuana and heroin to LSD, much as we found was the case with jazz musicians at the time. LSD was developed in 1943, and it wasn't made illegal in the United States until 1966. Until that time, it was pretty readily available, especially in large urban centers. Individuals such as Timothy Leary, a former Harvard professor, advised students to give it a try, as they, quote, turn on, tune in, and drop out. This is not advice I would give any of you. The neighborhood at the corner of Haight and Ashbury in San Francisco might be thought of as America's countercultural capital. This is the San Francisco area that boasts blocks and blocks of pastel-colored Victorian houses. Back in the 1960s, this was an affordable place to live, and students and other young artists flocked to the neighborhood, cramming as many roommates into a house as necessary to make the rent. In addition to being home to groups such as the Grateful Dead and Jefferson Airplane, the Bay Area embraced hippie culture more generally. Allen Ginsberg read his beat poetry on the lawns at Berkeley, and the famous San Francisco music venue, the Fillmore Auditorium, hosted acid tests. At these acid tests, acid, that is LSD, was available to be tried. Some rather disastrous experiences at these events were pivotal in leading to the eventual banning of the substance in the United States. Make sure you listen to performances of the Grateful Dead, Janis Joplin, and Jefferson Airplane on your playlist. Of course, Jerry Garcia was the famous lead guitarist of the Grateful Dead. Also, Robert Hunter wrote Ripple, the tune they're playing on your playlist. You probably should also know that Grace Slick was the lead singer for Jefferson Airplane, and that Jefferson Airplane in many ways, especially with their tune White Rabbit, is the quintessential psychedelic band. The improvisation, long pieces, and hypnotic rhythms of psychedelia were everywhere to be heard in San Francisco. We need to remember, however, that most of the rest of the United States hadn't heard much about it yet. Remember that most of the country got its music from the radio, and remember that in the 1960s, music radio was AM radio. AM radio was pretty closely regulated. DJs chose the 3-minute songs that were most likely to be of commercial interest, and they were generally responsible for playing music whose lyrics the public would find to be non-offensive. Psychedelic tunes might stretch out for several minutes, and their reference to drug use and countercultural experience were generally quite explicit. This is where concert organizer and DJ Tom Donahue came in. Finding himself a foreign language program FM station that was strapped for cash and seemed to have a very limited audience, he gradually took over time slots. By August of 1967, the station was a full-time rock station. Donahue played entire albums, including Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band and others. He also played a lot of blues and folk music. Seeing Donahue's success, little by little, more stations across the country gave playtime to this more ambitious rock music, and gradually FM stations became the home of commercial and popular music. One of the most flamboyant and virtuoso rock guitarists of all times, Jimi Hendrix lived a short but action-packed life. He appears to have wanted to play the guitar from a young age, and when he got his first instrument at age 15, he formed his own band. Twice caught in stolen cars, he was given the choice between prison and the army, and he enlisted. He completed paratrooper training, but then was found to be increasingly unsuitable for duty and was honorably discharged. After working for several years with various bands, he was taken to England by Chas Chandler, who had left the Animals and was starting a managing and producing career. There, in England, Hendrix impressed the likes of Eric Clapton, John Lennon, Pete Townshend, and Mick Jagger, among others. He started writing and making recordings that were hitting the charts. Purple Haze by the Jimi Hendrix Experience hit number 3 on the UK charts in March of 1967. As he continued to play, his performances became more sensational. Now, in addition to playing his guitar behind his back and with his teeth, he also took to lighting his guitar on fire or smashing it to pieces at the ends of his concerts. Hendrix's most infamous performance was probably his performance of the Star-Spangled Banner at Woodstock. In this performance, he used feedback to mimic the sound of rockets, and this stirred up a lot of controversy about the treatment of the national anthem. Hendrix would die a scarce year later from complications of a drug overdose. So he was a phenomenal guitar player, and he also did a lot of experimentation with feedback. Woodstock is probably one of the most famous musical events in all of American history. Billed as 3 days of peace and music, its 32 musical acts attracted around 400,000 attendees to a secluded dairy farm in the Catskills of New York State. The first music group to sign up was the newly popular Creedence Clearwater Revival. They were then joined by performers such as Richie Havens, Ravi Shankar, Arlo Guthrie, Santana, The Grateful Dead, Janis Joplin, Sly and the Family Stone, The Who, Jefferson Airplane, Country Joe and the Fish, Blood, Sweat and Tears, and Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, just to name a few. The festival had to be moved at the last minute when authorities ruled that the planned venue did not have enough portable toilets for the 50,000 attendees that were expected. Little did they know that they would have 8-fold that many, and it did create a bit of chaos at Woodstock, and there was rain, but there were also a lot of reports of people enjoying being together and helping each other, all the things that the concert organizers, of course, had hoped for in the first place. There are several good documentaries on Woodstock. We have some in the Ingram Library. Also, there's some great video footage, so please watch that on your playlist. Our final screen again is a quiz screen. So look at the questions and then pause your video, and I'll be back with the answers shortly. It was Timothy Leary who counseled youngsters to turn on, tune in, and drop out. San Francisco was the psychedelic capital of the United States. And it was Jimi Hendrix, of course, who did the famous rendition of the Star-Spangled Banner at Woodstock.